So this week the embargo lifted for Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl. And this was an interesting one, to say the least. Obviously, the game was reviewed. A lot of people would have played it, obviously played it during the review period under NDA. And then essentially, how can I say it? A day zero patch arrived, like, I think maybe the day before the embargo, which was the
was
day
the
before
morning
the
of,
release
right?
date, I think. I'm not
Wednesday?
sure. Alex, you've been on Stalker pretty much since the review code came in. We had less than a week effectively with the game.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what concerns me. Obviously, the Day Zero patch introduced a lot of dramatic improvements compared to some of the assets that you were sharing around during the review period. I'm just wondering whether a lot of the negative reaction to some of the game is based on outdated code, which isn't the fault of the reviewer. More the sort of crunch time to actually get the game into shape for launch. I'm wondering if you can share some of your experiences during the review period.
Oh yeah, sure. I think I knew something was, well, even before I played it, I got two messages from two independent reviewers, one who I hadn't talked to in a couple of years even, saying like, hey, are you having issues? Because they want to see if DF's having issues. That means they can write about it, right? And and that says a lot, I think. And just as like a core example, and I'm going to share this footage here where I think the Xbox, I was playing on PC on a super high-end kit, and I was noticing issues there too, particularly in regards to frame times when just walking, footage of like 80 millisecond frame time spikes while just walking around in a very tiny little area. But on Xbox Series consoles, there was these large frame time spikes when just walking around in general, as well as the fact that if you played in the 30 FPS mode, as well as in the 60 hertz mode, depending upon how quickly you would move the stick and whether or not you were also moving at the same time, this was different between all the versions, you would get one movement frame being extremely tiny movement and the other one being a lot further. So everything would look like it was running at half FPS. And I actually sent that off to the developers because I was like, this issue makes the game unplayable. And that, lo and behold, that was fixed during the review period. And there was some positive interaction there with the developers about it, back and forth through an intermediary. But issues like that, depending upon the version you were playing, like for example, if you were testing this game on Xbox, you would probably come off with the idea that this game is completely broken. Now that's one thing.
Right.
Performance issues, which I don't feel are very great to ship review code to to reviewers for, because they may be struggling then with performance instead of concentrating on critiquing the game. Right. But then there was also gameplay bugs. Like the first time I fired my weapon in Stalker 2, I heard no gun sounds. And it was also like an intense moment. I was like, man, that sucks. I figured out that you could change an audio option, which would make it return. But most people who are playing the game would just be like, oh, this game's broken. My gun doesn't have any sounds. You know, there was also things like characters. Like I went back to an area once before and I had already killed all the baddies there, and I saw from the distance a bunch of people standing up, and I started shooting at them. But then I walked closer, and I realized it was just the corpses that were T-posed, which was so excellent to see. There was a lot of stuff like that in the initial part of playing the game up like on Thursday and Friday, and a little bit on Monday morning as well too. PC version was getting constantly patched. Xbox got I think more staggered releases of patches during the review period. But basically, the game that reviewers were playing was, I would say, markedly less stable, performed dramatically worse. For example, the 30 FPS mode, when just walking around on Xbox Series S or X, would have like, 50 millisecond frame time spikes or 75 millisecond frame time spikes all the time while walking around. The launch code is pretty much perfect except for in the areas of the Stalker towns. which is completely different experience. There's things like that where I don't actually want to fault reviewers so much so for saying that they had a negative experience with the game, because they were just playing what they had, and how are they to know that the launch version is to be so radically different? So this is an issue, I think, from a publishing angle, where I think the publisher really should have given the team, GSC, with these issues being known apparently, should have given them enough time, a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever it would have taken, to make sure that as many issues are cleaned up as possible before sending out review code, because you're just doing a disservice to a game which otherwise could be in a way better position, right? And the word of mouth may be different as a result too. Because I think a lot of people were like, oh my God, they did it again. It's because Stalker 2007 shipped rather broken, by the way. They shipped it again rather broken. But, Day Zero patch, wholly more playable than whatever I had access to on last Thursday, where I was sending messages to like Rich or John. I was like, the first message to John was like, hey, it doesn't seem that broken. And then it was like, never mind. Never mind. It's a bad situation all around, and I wish the game was shipped to reviewers in a state that was a lot better. But I guess the consumer in this point wins out, as it's a lot better at launch. Just curious what happens in the future, because there are still a number of open issues that I talked about in my video, specifically regarding CPU performance. And, this is a game that is doing technically behind the scenes a lot more AI stuff than, just like other games that have NPCs that are just a series of animations, if you know what I mean, versus NPCs that maybe have senses and the ability to react. So I'm curious to see what they can do there. But one thing I know is for certain, if they upgraded their version of Unreal Engine to later versions, they would just get better CPU performance no matter what, because the engine's inherent threading has gotten better over time, which I would love to see them do. I would really love to see this game move beyond its 5.1 base up into the latest version possible over its patching period. I think in the past we've heard from developers that there were some muted ideas of taking early Unreal Engine games and maybe upgrading Unreal Engine versions on them for patches. But I don't think we've seen that yet. But that would be an amazing way to get this game running and even looking better, because things like Lumen have gotten better over time. Nanite applies to vegetation, as well as VSMs being cheaper for vegetation in later versions of Unreal, which were, I think, my visual negative points, was lumen quality, as well as the fact that vegetation has super obvious LODing, as well as shadow issues close to the camera. So yeah, I hope they do that. But once again, I cannot fault reviewers too much for being so negative about the game. That's the way it was playing up until launch day. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the real problem. What we've got here is that the game that actually was sent to reviewers was in a wholly different state for the majority of the period they had to review it. And we had a list of notes from the developer about things that have been patched and things that are going to be fixed and whatnot. But ultimately, you can't take the developer at their word. You've got to test the actual game that comes out. So there are some outlets that didn't have a review on embargo, and I kind of respect that. Because the experience that they had would not be reflective of what people were actually playing, which is kind of the whole point of a review. So yes, that I would say that is a publisher fail at that point. And I kind of worry about the developer as well, in terms of, because you look at that patch and so much was fixed that you can't help but wonder what conditions were at the developer to get all of that work done within the space of a few days.
Yeah, crunching, essentially.
Great,
crunching unendlessly at that point. And I think that's also it's not good for the reviewer. It's not good for the developers. It may harm the published game's image and sales. It just seems like a complete lose. And I really wish publishers in the end, and we deal with it way too often with not just like a title like this, but we will get often shipped, especially on PC games, where I'm just like tearing my hair out. And I'm saying, like, why are they shipping this game like this? why. And all too often there are day 0, day 1 patches, or 3-week later patches, 2-week later patches that change a whole lot. And that's just the way it is.
But equally, there are patches that do nothing.
Yes, yeah. Well, we have that. We're fixing it.
Yes.
It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, that's problematic. Oliver, any thoughts on this whole situation?
I mean, it's unfortunate it shipped in this kind of technical state, because the game itself, from all judgments I've seen, seems quite good. It seems quite well regarded in terms of the gameplay. But especially for like an open world UE5 title, you know, that phrase sends shivers down my spine.
Oh my God. Yeah, shivers.
Yeah, it seems like a tough situation on PC and console. But on consoles in particular, I do think there are probably some kind of configuration things they could have done without necessarily, you know, solving these technical issues. There are some things they could do to ameliorate some of them, like, you know, get that 30 FPS cap on consoles, but with good motion blur. A lot of motion blur where the shutter is basically fully open, the virtual shutter, so you get a lot of motion blur there and get that nice smoothness, hopefully, to the image. And then just kind of call it a day, because performance is not that good at 60 FPS. Either offer that as an option, or even offer that as the only option to players, and I think you might have a bit of a better experience there, because I really don't like the way that motion looks without motion blur at 30 FPS. To me, I really just want that motion blur in there to give you a bit of a smoother visual experience. Right. So yeah, that'd be my preference, and certainly that's what you see with other UE5 titles, or at least the one other UE5 title, I suppose, that has taken kind of this more cinematic approach on consoles, which is Hellblade 2. There you have a ton of post-processing, you have lots of motion blur. They really dial it up to make it look very cinematic and very smooth considering the refresh rate. And I think they could probably do something similar here.